And this afternoon, Global X ETFs will ring the closing bell to highlight its funds. And joining me now is Shauna Smith, SVP and Senior Investment Strategist at Global X ETFs. Shauna, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Ashley.
All right, so what are you going to be following most closely in today's session?
There's going to be lots of questions about where this momentum is going to head, especially coming off of the volatility that we saw last week. Lots of questions about whether or not the AI trade and excitement is beginning to fade as we do see some of that pressure come onto some of these larger tech names. We certainly saw that with Oracle and Broadcom last week. I think the jury's still out just in terms of where this market is going to move, at least very much for the short term. In terms of the long term, as we look ahead to 2026, we do think there's a lot to be constructive and encouraged about. I mentioned the AI trade. We do think we see a long runway. We talk a lot about 2026 being this prove-it moment for AI. We certainly have seen big spend from a lot of those larger tech companies. And we think the real opportunity moving forward is going to be in some of these phase 2, phase 3 sorts of names. So I think overall, traders and investors are just trying to wrap their heads around where this momentum is going to go specifically with AI, but then also balancing that with some of the econ data that we got out last week. When you take a look at the jobs picture, yes, we are seeing continued weakness there, especially with the move higher in the unemployment rate. But then the flip side, inflation, a lot to be encouraged about when we do see some stabilizing in terms of those inflationary pressures. So it's a coin toss in terms of what today's trading session is going to look like and what the next several trading sessions are going to look like. But of course, the question is going to be a lot on some of those larger AI names, but then also just more specifically beyond that, some of the opportunity and some of the sectors that haven't been getting so much love.
We've seen rotation out of the AI sector. Where are we seeing more rotation into?
Yeah, we've seen some excitement. I mean, most recently, when you take a look at some of the flows last week, going back to financials, industrials, and materials, we're able to attract some of that money as there has been some sort of questions within AI. But as a firm, more broadly speaking, we're very much still focused on the AI trade. I mentioned that prove-it moment for AI, the phase 2, phase 3 winners. So think beyond big tech. When you think beyond big tech, that means the infrastructure plays, energy plays, even some of the chip makers, not so much necessarily the larger ones. We got results from Micron last week, and that, of course, helps stabilize some of the questions surrounding AI. So we really think that there lies some compelling opportunity, and there's still room to run within that trade.
And a lot of our guests have talked about an AI bubble, but I understand that you do not think that we are in an AI bubble despite the rotation out of the sector. Can you elaborate on that?
A lot of that's just based on valuation. We've heard so much talk this year. There's been, I'm sure you've had so many conversations about this. There's been extensive coverage about whether or not we're in an AI bubble, whether or not there should be comparisons to the dot-com bubble. We don't see those comparisons as apples to apples. When you take a look at valuations, when you take a look at earnings growth, projected earnings growth, we do think that that supports where we are currently trading. So taking that all into account, we aren't necessarily worried about a bubble. And like I did say, we are seeing that trade broadening out when it comes to AI. So some of the names that haven't necessarily been the leaders this year, we do see them taking a more of a driver's seat as we look ahead for years to come.
What are some of those names?
I can't go into names specifically, but when you take a look at, I guess, how the role within AI, so think about the data center build-outs, think about some of the names that have larger players there, think about some of the chip makers that are starting to gain momentum in addition to larger names, obviously, like NVIDIA. And then even further down the value chain, when you take a look at monetization, companies that are employing AI that are able to help push our profits in the right direction. We do see that all obviously as a positive setup here for years to come.
And what themes do you think are going to dominate the headlines regarding AI as we get into 2026?
I think a lot of questions. I mean, at least when it comes to big tech, there's speculation, lots of questions about whether or not the massive amounts of cash that they are putting towards AI investments, whether or not that is going to pay off. So we think that, of course, is going to be a driver when it comes to many of some of those Mag 7 names. I think just looking ahead, though, even more broadly speaking, when it comes to some of those chip makers, when it comes to the data center build out, we have talked about that, yes, there is data center build out that's obviously at record highs, but still nowhere near meeting that demand and what that demand is going to look like for years to come. So there certainly is a lot of runway in terms of these companies of filling that demand and being able to potentially one day, hopefully, meet that demand with supply.
And your firm, Global X ETFs, will be ringing the closing bell this afternoon. How important is it for the firm, and what does it mean?
Oh, it's great. It's a huge honor. We're so excited to be ringing the opening bell here this afternoon. I mean, it's just been an incredible year for Global X. When you take a look at our AUM, assets under management, right around 75 billion. It's been a record year. When you take a look at our fund launches, a lot of the excitement that we've been able to generate. We've been talking a lot about AI here in this interview. Our AI funds have been performing very, very well. But then even fixed income, and then when you look even beyond that and take a look at some of the income return funds, I mean, there's just a lot to be excited about here at Global X. And then beyond that, when you take a look at one of our funds like Shield, our defense spending, obviously, that is a huge focus here for Global X going forward. We think that there's a lot to be encouraged about. And then even beyond that, we have one of our funds, PAVE, right around the 10 billion AUM mark. So there is a lot to be excited about. We have a number of product launches lined up for next year. So we're very, very excited to carry in this record momentum into the new year.
All right, well, we're excited to have you ring the closing bell later. Shauna Smith, thank you so much. SVP and Senior Investment Strategist at Global X ETFs. Thanks for joining us.